Welcome to Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. This is the 5th anniversary of the release of Eddie Conway from prison after 44 years in jail. In 1970, he was framed for the murder of a cop, and over the 44 years in prison, he never stopped organizing. He organized the union. He organized prisoners for their rights. Eddie was a Panther when he went to jail, and he was a Panther in jail. He organized a big contingent of the Panthers while he was in prison. He spent 6 of the first 7 years in solitary confinement, but he spent that time reading as his colleagues in the Panther Party in jail smuggled books to him while he was there. We did a 10-part series, a 10-part Reality Asserts Itself in 2014. And on the 5th anniversary of his release, we're going to pick up and continue that series. But before we do that, here's a little taste of the RAI from 2014. Part 1 was 44 years in prison and still a revolutionary.
When I was in the 4th grade, I attended a school on Mountain and Riggs Street, 132 it was named. And we put on a play for Christmas, and we didn't have an auditorium. And we were allowed to go across into the white community to their elementary school to use their auditorium. Huge school. It was impossible. You could have set almost our whole school into their auditorium. And yeah, I mean, the science lab, outside track, swimming pool. I mean, it was devastating, you know, for like a 8-year-old. You know, after that, coming back into the black community and going back to that school, it damaged us so much we acted out that whole year. In fact, I failed the 4th grade as a result of that experience. I think that was my first contact with institutional racism in Baltimore.
Part 2 was titled Moments of Radicalization.
I ended up as the operating room technician at Johns Hopkins. There was this particular case where this doctor actually performed a mastectomy. That's the removal of both breasts from a woman. At that time, this is 68 now, at that time, it was a 3-hour operation. He had a golf game to go to in an hour's time, and he literally butchered that woman on the table while I was in the operating room. Black woman in her 50s, and he sawed off her breasts, pretty much. So it was like 10 people in the operating room. And what I didn't understand at the time is I was the only black person in the operating room. I didn't realize it at the time. Yeah, well, she got killed. He cut her breasts off and she bled to death. He was out in the hallway talking to her daughter and her husband, and he's telling this woman and her husband that he did all he could to save her life. And I went temporarily insane. He's got his golf shoes on and he's got his golf gloves in his hand. And I'm like, you're lying, motherfucker, you know? And I just went off and I ended up hitting him and I knocked him down. And of course, you know, they called security on me, you know, crazy black man loose in the hospital. I had to end up going to the administration. But I'm like, look, I was in there. He killed her. Y'all need to charge him. It's murder. I'm not letting this go. Y'all fixing this. And called the Afro. I called, you know, and because I knew he should have been in jail.
Part 3, COINTELPRO, Attack on the Panthers.
His name was Warren Hart, and he worked for the National Security Agency and formulated the apparatus that became the Baltimore Panthers.
And the idea is
the Panthers.
The Panther Party will be a magnet to attract militants, and you'll get to know who are the militants.
And get them locked up and get them arrested, and some of them actually disappeared. One of my friends actually was murdered as a result of this guy. He sent him out on a mission that was unauthorized and illegal, and he got an entanglement with the police and ended up getting killed. And then I started investigating the captain and determined that he wasn't who he said he was, because he didn't even live where he said he was living. He didn't work where he was supposed to be working. But at that point, I realized that I was dealing with somebody that was connected and had some kind of police cover. So I actually reported to California, and they sent an investigation team down from like New York. And during the process of investigating, he fled. He fled Maryland, he fled the country.
Now, this is, as we all know now,
Yeah.
or anyone that follows this, this was part of a national campaign, COINTELPRO,
Yes.
which involved the National Security Agency, the FBI, and many local police forces.
Military intelligence, et cetera. And,
all targeting black militancy.
Every police force, state police, the local police, et cetera. And of course, we didn't discover that until the mid-'70s. I mean, by that time, they had destroyed the Black Panther Party.
Part 4, the state targeted the Panthers because we were socialists, not because we were armed.
The example the Black Panther Party set in its socialist programs was a threat to the structure of capitalism in America and in the world, in fact. But it was only the Panthers that were working with white groups, and that was working with Mexicans, and that was working with Puerto Ricans, and that was working with the American Indians, and that was working with the Asians. That was the threat. The threat of all of these different people from all of these different communities working together.
Part 5 was titled An American Fascism. Officially, COINTELPRO operated from 1956 to 1971. Unofficially, the program continued under other names and was most recently codified as the U.S. Patriot Act. So this ain't over.
It's the habit of the American government to kind of say, okay, we made a mistake. It's just a one-time thing. We violated people's rights. It won't happen again. You know, we'll put everything in check, and then they'll go back, and a couple of years later, new laws will come out, and those laws will justify whatever that behavior was. And then from then on in, that's no longer a mistake. And the next time it happens, it's something different. Torture, say, for instance, you know, or enhanced interrogation. And at some point, that becomes, well, okay, that's legal.
Part 6, the frame-up.
I was arrested a couple of days after a shooting in which 2 Panthers got locked up, police got killed, and another police got shot. And they decided initially to arrest the entire leadership of the Baltimore Panther Party. A police informer had disappeared 6 months before. They had indictments that they were going to execute against us at some point. They then did it as a result of this as a result of the incident.
One of the police officers that was in on arresting the other 2 guys claimed that he had chased someone, and after 2 days identified you.
Yes.
What was about that? What was the issue of that
Well,
identification?
the issue was, and we ultimately went to the Supreme Court about it, was that apparently they took 2 stacks of photographs, and no other photo was duplicated in the stacks, and they put my photograph in both stacks. And and I don't know, they might have already instructed the guy to select that particular picture. But as he looked through stack 1, he didn't see anybody he could identify. He looked through stack 2 and he see the same picture duplicated. He identified me. By rights at that time, by me being in custody, I should have been put in a lineup.
Yeah, why wasn't there a lineup?
Because they wouldn't have been able to make an identification.
Part 7, 6 years in solitary confinement.
The conditions were you were locked in the cell, you didn't have anything, you were allowed the soap, toothpaste, that kind of stuff. You weren't allowed anything else. You stayed in that cell for 23 and a half hours. You came out for a half an hour one day and got a walk. The next day you came out, you got a shower, and it rotated from shower to walk. I'm in there pretty much because I refuse to be abused. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
Part 8, I refuse to be treated like an animal.
A library, so the library up in the prison, there was like 2,000 people there and no library. And so I got books, and I read, and I held political education classes at night for the rest of the guys that wanted to participate. Matter of fact, the whole something like 400 or 500 guys would just be quiet, and they would allow for like political education.
You're actually organizing a local Black Panther organization in the prison.
Yes, and a prisoners' labor union. We figured that the best way to get prison reform was to get a minimum wage.
Part 9 was titled, We Dehumanize Those We Want to Exploit.
To look at the prison experience, what we found was that in order for the guards to have authority, they have to continue to make efforts to dehumanize every person they see in the population. Obviously, the people that are benefiting from that kind of arrangement, whether you're talking about slavery or the multinational corporations today, their bottom line is profit, and their secondary concern is security. Or what they have done is they have used certain segments of the population to incarcerate, prison, and hold people in captivity, and they use other parts of the population to fill up those prisons and to fill up those cells. At the same time, they'll continue to make enormous profits, but they've created something else, divide and conquer. And so it distracts everybody from what's really going on. Both groups of people are being exploited and are being super exploited, but we can't organize and we can't get together and look at the common cause of our problem, because we're right there in each other's face.
And part 10 was titled, Why Eddie Conway Joined the Real News.
Well, one of the things that happened in the prison system itself was that we got an avalanche of negative news about the community. It's always somebody being shot, somebody being killed. The news was not only depressing, but it was desensitizing. And eventually, I stumbled across, came down to do an interview with the Real News, and it was kind of like the first time I have actually came in contact with a news media that was talking about what the problem really was in terms of the economics, in terms of the need to organize on the ground, in terms of understanding the history of the environment movement and so on. And so I volunteered to work and do whatever I could, because I seen that as a very positive entity in America.
Now joining us again in the studio for part 11 of our series is Eddie Conway, 5 years later. Thanks for joining us, Eddie.
Thanks for having me.
So talk about this 5-year span. In the previous interviews, you talked about getting out of prison and kind of being shocked at the state of Baltimore. It looked like a war zone, I think was your language. 5 years later, what do you make of your city?
Well, the city is in trouble, as all urban areas, especially in some poor communities, poor white communities and poor Black communities. The process of gentrification is occurring all over the country. Populations are being displaced, sent for the most part into counties now, and unemployment is rapid. The main industries have either offshored or have automated. And even though 80% of the population in Baltimore City is actually employed, some people have to have 2 and 3 jobs. Some people that are employed, working 40 hours a week, are actually on food stamps and other government assistance. That 20% that's been pushed to the side is the 20% that's really suffering because they're unemployed, unemployable, almost no assistance, and fighting from day to day just to find a way to eat.
Now, you've been very active in the community. You're not just a journalist and producer and in the leadership at the Real News Network, because I don't know if people at home know this, but Eddie is, we have a sort of a three-person senior leadership, and Eddie is one of the three, and then we have a management committee. But you're also very dedicated, very involved in the community of Sandtown, Winchester, where Freddie Gray grew up. So what is the feeling, first of all, of the people there, and then talk about the work you've been doing, because you've been building a community center there called the Tubman House. But first of all, talk about the mood of people, and you know, from that height of resistance, what have people learned? Where are they at?
Well, I think it's safe to say that people are so engaged in day-to-day survival, and a large portion of that community are returning people from prison, from the prison system, unemployed. There's no jobs there, so most of the economy is illegal activity. And that struggle creates a level of violence that's probably higher and more intense than any other area, any other zip code in the city. And so before Freddie Gray, that's how it was. Freddie Gray brought out a level of anger because they could recognize their self in Freddie Gray, being beaten and abused like that. That's one thing. It's business as usual now. The oppression is the same as it was before. The organizing have dissipated because the anger is kind of gone. Like, this is what happens to us. This has been happening. We probably can't, we are mad, but we really don't know what we can do about it. We had hoped that these indictments would convict somebody. Everybody walked away, just what we thought, or feared. So the community is pretty much still in the same predicament it was. The stuff that I do down in the community with the Tubman House and the farm project is geared toward trying to change the conditions for young people down there.
Yeah, explain a bit about the farm project.
The farm project is, it was a project of Tubman House in which we decided that if we gave young people an opportunity to get a set of skills, to learn how to use, there's so much vacant land down there, and just neglected vacant land, to how to clean up the land, how to use it, how to grow food, how to sell that food, how to gain a skill. And at the same time trying to help them meet some of the needs in terms of school supplies or whatever we could gather for them, not in the sense of charity, but in the sense of solidarity. We wanted to change the looks that you had on young people's face. They were post-traumatic stress syndrome. They see the police raiding all the time. They see bodies dropping all the time. They don't know when their cousin or uncle or aunt or mother is going to end up in jail or dead.
So it's almost 50 years since you were arrested and went to jail. And conditions, not only are they not better, they're probably worse than when you went in 1970. How does this make you feel? Like, you're still, you know, active in the Real News, you're active in the community, you're still fighting, you're still organizing. You don't seem to give up in spite of 50 years later, it's worse, not better. Yes, it's 10 times worse. I'll make that point all the time. I don't give up because I understand people, there's 7 billion people on this planet. You know, there might be tens of millions of people
with an invested interest to keep this capitalist system operating on the planet. If we're going to go into the future and create a better world, then everybody that can needs to participate, needs to help, needs to organize. And so I've traveled in those last 5 years around the world, and I've seen people all over the world that's committed to changing the narrative of what's happening. And so I have faith, and I actually know that another world is possible. And it's beyond that. It's impossible not to stop the change. The change has to happen because the capitalist system has broken. It's then kind of like exhausted itself. Between automation and cybernation, it's going to change conditions drastically, and people are not going to be employable under that arrangement. But in addition to that, the planet is actually in peril of not being able to support human life with climate change because of these things that's happening now that's actually creating conditions in which my grandchildren might not be able to live on this planet. So young people don't have a choice. They gotta step up, and they are stepping up, and they gotta make a difference because their back's against the wall.
Well, please join us for the continuation of our series of Reality Asserts Itself with Eddie Conway. We're going to talk about the continued levels of violence in Baltimore, why, and what can be done about it. So please join us for Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.